Are you tired of losing freelance gigs or job opportunities because your portfolio looks like it's from the 80s? You're not alone. Many developers have their opportunities slip away due to outdated and uninspiring websites. But what if I told you that in the next few hours, you could learn to develop a jaw-dropping SaaS landing page that'll have clients fighting to hire you? Hi there, and welcome to a project-based course where you'll build and deploy a fully responsive website with a modern UI in React.js and Tailwind CSS. But don't let the tech stop you. You can make use of this course with any other tech you prefer, such as Astro, Next.js, or even Remix, and achieve the same result. You'll create Zora, the best modern business landing page on YouTube, with a simple and smooth, yet effective navigation bar, stunning hero section with a 3D image, gradients, and a call to action, modern feature section with 2 most important features on top and 4 more at the bottom, unique and animated pricing section, collapsible FAQ section to answer all the questions, a testimonial grid, and finally a demo and download section with a simple footer. And of course, we'll achieve perfect responsiveness on all devices. By building Sora, you'll gain the skill to build any high-converting landing page for any kind of business, as developing this project will teach you CSS from basics to advanced, including pseudo elements such as after and before, gradients, media queries, and more. I'll even teach you to deploy your websites to high-speed servers and give them a custom domain name using Hostinger. You'll build everything from scratch and deploy to the internet so that you can share it with your friends and potential clients and add it to your portfolio. I found this great design on UI8. This video features just a couple of sections from the whole design. Check it out, the link is in the description. And you might be wondering, what are the prerequisites for building such a fantastic website? This course is entirely beginner friendly. We'll start simple and then move to more complex topics. I'll explain every step of the way. And alongside this video, I've also prepared the ultimate Tailwind CSS starter kit, which contains an essential quick reference guide, a list of top component libraries, and detailed lessons for mastering Tailwind CSS. The link to this completely free guide is in the description. To make the development of your app even more productive, I'll introduce you to an IDE you didn't know you needed. WebStorm is a professional JavaScript and TypeScript IDE that'll make you so efficient, you'll be asking yourself, what was I doing with my life before this? JetBrains reached out to sponsor this video, and it was a no-brainer, as I've been using it within my projects anyway. WebStorm has become an essential part of my workflow. I can't wait to share everything it can do. It has a smart terminal with auto-suggestions, TypeScript type suggestions, code completions, automatic bug fixes, one-click refactoring, speed search, and an integrated Git and GitHub system. And here's the best part. Clicking the link in the description will give you a free 19-day access. So, now that you're all powered up and ready to go, let's dive right in. See, the app you'll build today isn't just a project. It is a career asset designed to showcase everything you're capable of, making you an attractive candidate for any job. And that's why I'll teach you how to go a step further. Hosting your credible app on a personalized domain makes you more professional, memorable, and improves your credibility and search engine visibility. So, before we dive into coding, let's get that domain name. I highly recommend Hostinger for hosting your modern app, and right now, they're offering a great deal which you don't want to miss. I personally go for the premium plan. And here's why it's perfect for this and many other projects. You can host 100 websites with the same account. You get a free domain name, which gives you a professional touch. You get a free SSL for HTTPS security, which creates trust with anyone visiting your portfolio. This deal won't last forever, and because I've partnered with Hostinger, you get an even bigger discount. Once you click the link in the description, click Claim Deal, and Add to Cart. Here, we'll have to choose the period of our hosting. With a crazy discount going on right now, I'll definitely choose 48 months to save the most money. Down below, you can choose your payment method and enter your JavaScript Mastery coupon code, which will give you an even bigger discount on your hosting package. And once you buy it, we are ready to set everything up and get started with Hostinger's guided setup. We are building a new website, so you can choose Create, and we're building a completely custom website, so we can choose Skip at the bottom. Next, we need to choose our domain name. As you can see, I'm using Hostinger even to host my JSMastery.pro domain. In this case, I'll go with something like Zora SaaS landing page. If you're not sure what you want to do right now, you can select the domain name later. For now, I'll select it and click Next. And while the domain is registering, I quickly want to let you know that if you ever get stuck with building this video or any other, in the description down below, there's a link to an active Discord community with a special server just for this video, so you can get immediate help. Next, let's choose a server that's closest to our audience, and that's it. The setup is being initialized. Once it's done, you'll be redirected to your project's dashboard. So finally, let's code it out, and we'll deploy it at the end of the course. Before we begin developing our app, I want to show you how you can set up a new IDE that I tried and loved so much that I decided to use it to replace my VS Code. I know making a switch is not easy, but just try it and you won't be disappointed. JetBrains' tools are trusted by Google, Tesla, Visa, Shopify, Citibank, and even NASA. So they'll suit us just fine. The link in the description will give you a free 90-day WebStorm license, so you have nothing to lose. Open it, fill in your information, click redeem, and follow the instructions in the email. Once you click the link you got in your email, you'll be redirected to your account dashboard and just click download. Then select your operating system and click download. Keep in mind, this is a full IDE and not just a code editor, so it's gonna take some time to download. Let's leave it be and I'll be right back. And if you're not ready to choose WebStorm yet, that's totally okay. You can still follow along with the entire video without any problems. I just want to say that I've been trying it on our internal projects for the last couple of months and found it to be the perfect IDE for web and mobile applications. Once you install it, it's going to ask you whether you want to import your settings from VS Code. So you can do that or start completely from scratch. In this case, I will import the settings. You can choose the theme, the key maps, plugins, and even the recent projects. This was super quick. And now we can create a new project. Instead of just creating a new empty project, WebStorm allows us to start from a specific framework or library. So if you want to, you can continue with Next.js or choose React. But I like this note right here saying that Create React App is not the advised method for creating React apps. So instead, you can switch over either to Next.js or Vite, which I'll be using for this video. And if you're using some other code editor, the only thing you have to do is run npx create Vite and then choose React in your console once it asks you. I'll show you how that looks like later on. And I can rename this project to something like SaaS_landing page and click create. WebStorm automatically asks me whether I want to run npm install to install the dependencies in the package JSON. So I'll just click it. And in a matter of seconds, I can just go here and run npm run dev to see our application running on localhost 5173. And we can immediately see it in the browser. If you're using some other code editor, you'll have to manually install Vite by going to the documentation and then running npm create Vite add latest /template react. Once you do that, we can go ahead and explore the file and folder structure that was created for us by Vite. Everything starts with the main.jsx, where we're just using React. And finally, we render the application as the main element. If we go into that app, you can see that right now we have the basic Vite boilerplate. What we can do is completely remove that and instead create a new empty React functional component. You can do that manually, or you can just use RAFCE, which is a shortcut to automatically create a React arrow function with an export. If this didn't work for you, that must mean that you don't have the extension. So you can head over to plugins or extensions, and you can search for any kind of a React snippets package. Great. Now we can quickly rerun our application by running npm run dev, which will open it up in the browser and allow us to see it side by side. And the next step is to add Tailwind CSS to our application. It is a utility-first CSS framework packed with utility classes that allow us to style our applications more easily. Basically, you can just add class names instead of writing manual style sheets, and the changes will automatically happen in the code. So to install it with Vite, you can just Google for Tailwind CSS Vite and head over to Tailwind CSS with Vite. The first step is already done, so we need to install Tailwind CSS. Let's first copy the installation command, and I'll open up a new terminal so I can paste it right here. npm install -d for dev dependencies, and we'll install everything Tailwind needs. And next, we can initialize a new Tailwind CSS project. So I'll just run npx Tailwind CSS init-p. After that, we have to modify our Tailwind config. That's a new file that has been generated for us right here. And instead of using this empty Tailwind config, I'll show you how you can fully customize it to make the theming of your application much easier. In the description of this video, I've put the full code for this project. So if you get stuck, you can refer to it, or you can just ask for help on our Discord. But even more than that, I have created a complete README with full information about this project. And a very important part of it are snippets and assets. So let's head over to number 5, snippets. And this will provide you a modified Tailwind config.js, which you can simply copy and then paste right here. This way, I can explain it to you and you'll know how to extend the theme of your future Tailwind applications as well. So if you take a quick look at this theme, you can see that we have many different colors, such as P1, P2, up to P5, and then we also have some S colors as well. P stands for primary, so here you can see our primary colors, and then S stands for secondary colors. And what we're doing here is declaring the class names for these colors, so we don't have to type it out every single time, because it's easy to make a mistake. You're saying hash 2EF2FF, and you have to type that every time. In the future, we'll just say color P1. We're doing something similar for box shadows. We're talking about a font which we're using, making some utility classes for the spacing, and just general things that are always good to have when developing these great UI UX applications. Now, the next step in setting up our Tailwind CSS is to add Tailwind CSS directives to our index.css file. We can see that file right here under index.css, and currently there's a lot of code provided to us by Vite. What we'll do instead is we'll use this index.css from the snippets in the README. So you can copy it and override everything that we currently have here. It contains these Tailwind CSS directives, but then I also added a couple of utility classes that are going to help us style our application. Such as I applied a Poppins font on our entire body, so we don't have to apply the font always. I also created some utility classes for different headings, such as H1 will always have these styles, so it's easy to declare them, and then once we're using it, we can say class name is equal to H1 instead of spelling all of these out every single time. That's it. These are just some helper functions which we'll use in our code. Finally, the next step is to test it out by creating an H1. So let's create it within our app. I'll put it right here within our div, H1 with a class name of text-3XL, font bold and underline. If we have properly installed Tailwind CSS, we should see these styles being applied to our H1. And I cannot really see an underline right here, so what we might do is just reload our terminal. Whenever something is not working as it's supposed to, just stop it from running by pressing Ctrl+C, and then run npm run dev one more time for the changes to take effect. And immediately, you can see the dark color being applied, and this text is bold and underlined. Great. We have a functional Vite application with Tailwind CSS set up. Now, another quick thing we can do before we begin coding out our great application is to fix the website's favicon and title. For that, we need our current project's logo. And if you think about it, there's a lot of other assets which we'll need too, such as this great neon illustration, the logo, and a lot of icons for all the different elements that our page will have. So just so you don't have to download them one by one, if you head over to the assets part of this README, you can click here and simply download it. Once you download it, you can unzip it, delete the public folder from here, and then simply drag and drop the new public folder in the root of your application. This one will contain all of the necessary images and assets, which allows us to go directly to the index.html, rename our application to Sora, SaaS landing page, and then change the path to the favicon. That's going to be just favicon.ico, not an SVG. If you do that, you can see that now the title and the favicon changed. And that means that we are ready to start developing our application. We'll use the app file for organizing different sections of our landing page. So I won't put the H1 directly in here. Rather, we'll turn this into a main HTML5 semantic tag, and I'll give it a class name equal to overflow-hidden. This will make sure that we don't see unnecessary scrolling bars. And then within here, we can render different sections of our page. So let's create a new folder within the source folder, and I'll call it sections. Within sections, I can create a new file called header.jsx. Within the header, we can run RAFCE to quickly generate a new React component for the header, and we can now refer to it right here within the app by automatically importing it from sections header.jsx. Now, if you open up the header, and if we start writing some code within it, you should be able to see it on the screen. So let's try to display a logo. I'll turn this into an HTML5 semantic header tag. Within it, I will render a div. And within the div, I'll render an anchor tag. Within that anchor tag, I'll render an image that'll have a source equal to /images/sora.svg. I'll give it a width of about 115 and a height of about 55. Finally, every image needs an alt tag, and I'll say logo. If I now save this, you can see this great logo appear right here, which means that the app is reading our header component, which is displaying the image. Now we can try further styling it so it looks like this on mobile, and it opens up into this beautiful mobile section, or on desktop devices, it's looking even better. It allows us to see all of the links, and check this out, as you scroll through different sections, the links actually turn into that color. So as I go to pricing, you can see that it is highlighted. So let's go ahead and implement it together. I'll bring us back to mobile view just so we can see our code next to our editor, and we can start styling our header. I'll give it a class name equal to fixed so that it stays on top, 0, and left 0. I'll also give it a z index of 50 so that once we do scroll, it appears on top of other elements. I'll give it a w full so that it goes to the full screen. I'll give it a bit of padding y to give it some space on top and bottom. And if we save this, you can see some spacing happened. By the way, please let me know if the font you're seeing right now is too big or too small. I just made it a bit bigger now, so hopefully it's easier for you to see. Let me know if this new version is good, or you'd like it even larger in the future. Next, let's style this inner div by giving it a class name equal to container. We'll make it a flex container, apply a height of 14, which is going to give it about 56 pixels. You can see that right here, as I have a Tailwind CSS extension or plugin installed, so it tells me which CSS properties are being applied by these classes. And if it doesn't do that when I hover, it's actually pulling it from the index.css. Next, I'll give it items-center to center all of the items. And then on max LG devices, I'll give it some padding. So this will apply some padding to devices larger than 1024 pixels. Next, let's style the anchor tag by giving it a class name equal to. On large devices, it'll be hidden, and typically it'll have a flex of 1. We can also give it a cursor dash pointer to make it appear clickable, and a z index of 2 so it shows on top of other elements. Now we can start adding the rest of the nav links. We'll do that by going below the anchor tag and render a div. For now, let's give this div a class name equal to w-full so it extends for the full width, and let's give it a border of 2 and border amber 400, for example. This way you can see where that div is in space, so we can start adding additional elements within it, and you'll always know what it is referring to. Within it, we can display a nav, and within the nav, we can display a UL with a class name equal to flex. On max LG devices, it'll be block, and on max LG devices, it'll have a PX of 12. You'll see me add these max LG media queries a lot. That's because we'll only be creating one header, and we'll reuse it for mobile devices as well as desktop devices. So we have to achieve the change from the typical navbar where it has a lot of space on desktop to a navbar that fits vertically on a drawer-like screen on mobile. And I'll teach you how to do all of that using media queries. Within the UL, I'll render my first li, which will have a class name equal to nav-li. And within it, we can render a special component called nav link. For now, I'll leave it commented out because this will be a component coming from a new package called React Scroll. React Scroll is a popular NPM package that allows us to quickly scroll to different elements on the screen. So let's just quickly install it by running npm install React Scroll. I'll do it within a new terminal. It's super lightweight, so it got installed within seconds. And we can now create a new reusable component that'll later on use this package. So right on top of the header, I can create a new const. I'll call it a nav link, which will be a typical immediate return functional component. By immediate return, I mean it doesn't have curly braces. It just have parentheses, so it means that it can automatically return whatever is within it. And here we can return a link scroll. This link scroll is going to be coming from the package we installed. So we can say import link as link scroll coming from React-scroll. And now this link scroll allows us to pass many things into it. But first of all, let's pass just one thing, which is the title. So the title of our first nav link will be features. And now we can accept that title as a prop title and destructure it. And then we can render that title right within the link scroll. And there we go. You can see features. Now that we have the features, we can also show other list items right below. But we'll put a dot in between them. So here I can render a div. It'll be a self-closing div with a class name equal to dot. And even though you cannot see it here, on the desktop version of the final application, this is the dot I'm talking about. It'll just create some additional spacing. Below the dot, we can duplicate our nav link, and this time we'll give it a title of pricing. Below this list item, I'll create another li and give it a class name equal to nav-logo. Within this one, we'll actually use a link scroll component right here, and within it, I will render an image with a source equal to /images/sora.svg with a width of about 160 and a height of about 55, and also an alt tag of logo. If I save this, you can see the logo appear right here. Finally, we can go below this li and create another list item with a class name equal to nav-li, within which we can render a nav link with a title of FAQ for frequently asked questions. Within it, we can render another div that'll have a class name equal to dot. And finally, we can render the last nav link with a title of download, which will be our last section. If we save this, I think you can start seeing what we're going for. We have features, pricing, then the logo, and then FAQ and download. Now let's style our list items a bit by going to nav link and by giving additional properties to the link scroll, starting with class name. It'll have a class name of base-bold, which will make the text a bit bolder. We'll also give it a text-p4, so this is a primary 4 color to make it pop a bit. We'll also give it uppercase, which will immediately make it look so much better. And we'll transition the colors. So I can say transition colors. Whenever you add a transition property, you also need to add a duration for that transition. And in this case, I'll make it 500 milliseconds. Then I'll give it a cursor pointer to make sure that people know they can click them. And then I'll give it an effect. In this case, a hover effect where I'll change the color to text P1, primary 1. And this transition colors and duration will apply when the color of the text changes. So as I hover, you can notice it doesn't immediately hover it, rather it does it over 500 milliseconds. If I extend this to a longer duration, something like, let's do maybe even 1000 milliseconds, and save, you should start seeing that it takes some time to get to the full color. Okay, I'll leave it 500 for now. Let's also say on max LG devices, margin Y will be 4, and on max LG devices, we'll apply the H5 property. So we're applying these only for mobile devices. So one more time, just to explain this maxLG, if we're applying this property, this means that we're adding a media query that'll only show on mobile devices. Later on, we'll pass additional properties to this link scroll, but for now, it's okay. For now, I want to actually make sure that this container fits in the screen. Remember, the container is right here where I gave it this border. So now, instead of the border, let's make it work for mobile devices. We can do that by giving it a maxLG relative. On maxLG, it'll be flex. On maxLG, we'll apply a flex call for mobile devices. On maxLG, we'll apply a min-h-screen, which means that it'll take the full height of the screen. On maxLG, we'll apply a padding of 6. On maxLG, we'll apply an overflow of hidden. We'll apply a sidebar before, and on maxMD, a padding X of 4. And now, even though the elements are gone, you can start seeing this background color appear right here. Let's also style the nav by giving it a class name. On maxLG, we'll give it relative, and on max-lg, a z index of 2, and on maxLG, a margin y of auto. And now we can start seeing the elements again. And we can remove the W full in this case. So now the logo shows to the left side of the items. And if we expand this on mobile devices, it's looking like this. Sure, looks good, but it should span throughout the full width. So to achieve that look, what I want to do is wrap this div with another div. So create a new div right here and properly close it right here to the bottom. So let's go all the way down and close it right here. I can notice that the indentation in my device is not good. You can notice that it didn't auto-indent this one step forward. If you want the auto-indentation to work, you can install a package called Prettier. So go to the terminal and run npm install Prettier. Once it is installed, I'll go to my settings and type Prettier, and I will enable automatic Prettier configuration with a run on save. If I do this and make a modification to my file and then press Command S, it'll nicely indent everything and make sure that my code is nicely structured. It should work similar to this on other code editors as well, but you just saw how simple it was on WebStorm. Now, to this div, we can provide a class name equal to w-full, of course, lowercase. And now you can see that this fixed our desktop issue. Let's continue adding additional styles to this div by giving it a maxLG fixed, maxLG top 0 to put it to the top, maxLG left 0 as well, maxLG W full, maxLG BG of S2. So this is a different background, as you can see, and on maxLG opacity of 0. So do you notice what we have just done? We have completely changed the opacity of all of these elements on mobile devices. Why? Because we want to only show them once we click on this toggle on top, and then we want to show them in this nice looking UI. So to achieve that, let's create that hamburger button that would allow us to activate that mobile mode. I'm going to go down below the nav and below two more divs that are below the nav, and I'll create a button. That's going to be a hamburger button with a class name LG hidden. So of course, it's going to be hidden on desktop devices because we can show all the elements. Z index of 2, size of 10, border of 2, border of S4 over 25, that's a color, rounded dash full, flex, justify center, and items center. If we save this, we can see a nice looking circle. And within that circle, we also want to render an IMG with a source equal to /images/ magic.svg. It's this great looking icon. And now we want to add a functionality for clicking on that button. In React, we add functionality by utilizing state. So we can go to this header and we can create a new use state snippet. I'll call it isOpen, set isOpen, at the start set to false. And you can see how WebStorm automatically recognizes that this false actually refers to the initial state. Now that we have this state, I can actually change it on the button click. So if I go back to the button, I can give it an on-click listener and give it a callback function where we can call the setIsOpen. And whenever you're changing the state with the previous version of the same state, you have to get the prev state. And then in the callback function, we can say not prev state, which is basically going to toggle it from off to on and from on to off. Now we can modify what this image shows depending on the state. So we can make the source a dynamic template string like this. And we can say /images/ and then dynamically, if isOpen is true, then we can render a string of close, else we can render a string of magic, and then we can end it with a .svg. Now, if I click it, see how it changes on click. We can also give it an additional property of alt equal to magic and class name equal to size is 1/2 and object-contain. There we go. So this is looking much better. So now we're modifying the state. And now depending on that state, we can change how our header looks and feels. We can do that by going to this div right here below an anchor tag. And instead of just having a set of predefined class names, we'll dynamically change those class names. And we'll do that using a package called CLSX. CLSX is a tiny package that allows you to construct class name strings conditionally. That's all that it does. So let's simply install it by running npm install CLSX. Great. Once you install it, its usage is pretty simple. Instead of automatically providing class names here, you turn this into a dynamic block of code. You call CLSX and you import it from CLSX. That has to look like this, import CLSX from CLSX, and then you expand it as a function call. The first parameter to the function are all the classes you have created so far. So we can copy them like this. But now what is different is the second parameter, where depending on that parameter, like if isOpen is true, you can add some additional class names, such as maxLG, and we can set the opacity to 100. Or if not isOpen is true, then we can say maxLG, pointer events none. Now if we save this, and I click it, you can see that we're now toggling on and off this menu. This is looking great. Let's further style this logo in the middle by going to our link scroll where we're rendering this image, and let's provide it some additional properties, such as to where this will scroll, and it'll scroll to the hero section. The offset of the scroll will be a -100 pixels. I'll explain later on what this does, or let me explain it right now. If you're somewhere and you click on that element, it'll actually scroll to that part. Like if I click FAQ, you can see how it scrolls to there. Download goes to download. So by passing these additional properties, you're choosing where you want to scroll to. Next, let's give it a spy element, which will make sure that once you're on that section, it'll make sure that it is highlighted on the navigation bar. We can also give it smooth to enable smooth scrolling, and we can give it additional class names. The class name will be equal to CLSX, where we're going to provide it maxLG is going to be hidden. So in mobile devices, it's completely hidden because we already have the logo on the top. Next, we can give it a transition transform, duration of 500, and a cursor dash pointer. Finally, we can make this mobile drawer look a bit better by adding some backgrounds. So let's scroll down a bit, and we can go below the nav, which is right here. We can render a div, which will act as the background for the mobile sidebar. Within there, we can render two different images. One will have a source of /images /bg outline, ending with an S, bgoutlines.svg. It'll have a width of 960 pixels and a height of 380 pixels. It'll have an alt of outline and a class name equal to relative and z-index of 2. If we save this, nothing happens yet. But now we can duplicate this image below, and instead of BG outlines, we can say BG outlines fill. This is a second image. This one is actually a PNG. It'll have the same width and height, but a bit different class names. It'll be absolute with an inset 0. This means top 0, left 0, right 0, everything is 0. And mix blend soft light with an opacity of 5. I will explain what this does very soon. But before I can do that, we need to provide class names to this div, which will make these two images appear. So let's give it a class name equal to, on large devices, hidden, typically block. It'll have absolute positioning and top 1/2, which is 50%, left 0, W of, in square brackets, 960 pixels, and H dash in square brackets, 380 pixels. Now we can slowly start seeing those backgrounds, and we can translate them a bit by using the translate X property of minus 290 pixels, as well as minus translate dash Y dash 1/2. And finally, we can rotate it by 90 degrees. And now you can see those two images appear very nicely right here. So if I comment out the first image, you'll see that we lose the overlay or the outline. And if I comment out the second image, you can see we lose the fill. Both of these blend together very nicely to form this final image. Great. That means that we're almost done with the header. Let's quickly check it out on desktop too. Looks pretty good. We'll get back to the header later on once we implement some sections so we can actually scroll through the website. Because as we scroll up to a specific point, then we want to collapse it a bit and add a background, which will make it look very nice no matter where on the page we are. But we cannot implement that yet as we cannot scroll down, as we haven't yet done the hero section. So for the time being, we can jump out of the header and we can start implementing our hero section. You know the drill. We'll create a new section within the sections folder. I'll call it hero.jsx. We'll run RAFCE, and I'll import it right here below the header. That's going to be hero, coming from sections hero, and we can now start implementing it. To get started, I will first turn this div into a section, and I'll give it a class name equal to relative. And just so you can see where it is, I'll give it a border of 2 and border amber 400. And now we can see that the hero seems to be on top of the navbar, which is not what we want. So I'll give it a padding top of 60 and padding bottom of 40. On Max LG devices, I'll give it a padding top of 52. And on Max LG devices, I'll give it a padding bottom of 36. If I save this, this will make it a bit shorter. And on Max MD devices, padding top of 36. And on Max MD devices, padding bottom of 32. So we're just kind of resetting it and making it work with different screen sizes. Within it, I want to render an element. And this element will be coming from the React scroll package. So let's get it from here, import element from React scroll. What this element is basically a div that we can scroll to. So we can give it a name of hero section. We'll connect this to our navigation bar very soon. Within this element, we can render a div with a class name of container. And within the container, we can have another div that'll have a class name of relative, z of 2, max w of 512, and on Max LG devices, max w of 388. Within it, we can finally render a div where we can specify what our app is about. Xora is an AI video editing application. So let's say video editing. This will be a small chip or a caption on top of our main title. So let's give it a class name equal to caption, small dash 2, uppercase, and text dash P3. There we go. We can go below it now and render an H1 with a class name equal to margin bottom of 6 and H1. Let's properly spell the class name here. And let's render the text within the H1 so you can see it. I'll say amazingly simple. Okay, that's huge. So let's style it a bit further by giving it a text of P4. Let's give it uppercase. On max LG devices, let's give it a margin bottom of 7. And on max LG devices, let's make it an H2 because it's a bit too large for mobile devices. On max MD devices, we can give it a margin bottom of 4. And on max MD devices, we can make it text 5XL instead of very, very large. And on max MD devices, we can modify the leading a bit to space it out differently. Great. Now we can go below this H1 and render a P tag that'll say something along the lines of, we designed Sora AI video editor to be an easy to use, quick to learn, and surprisingly powerful. There we go. Let's style this a bit by giving it a class name equal to max-w of 440, margin bottom of 14, body of 1, and on max MD devices, margin bottom of 10. Now we can start seeing our hero section shape a bit. Below it, we can add a scroll. So let's import link as link scroll coming from React scroll, and let's render it below the P tag. Link scroll, which when clicked will scroll to the features section, and it'll have an offset of -100, spy, and smooth. And within here, we can show some kind of text to scroll down to the features section. Of course, what we're really going for is this beautiful looking button. And if you think about it, this button will be reused many times throughout this video. That's how it should be. We should create a beautiful component once and then reuse it all across the application. That's why I'll teach you how to create this button as a custom reusable component so you can use it within all the other sections in just a single line. Let's start doing that by creating a new components folder within the source folder. I'll call it components. And within it, I'll create a new button.jsx file, inside of which I'll run rafce, and I will now import that button right here within link scroll. Make sure to import it at the top as well from components button. We'll pass it a prop equal to icon, which is going to go to /images/zap.svg, and we can make it not self-closing. Rather, within it, I'll say try it now. So this will be converted over to the button as children because we're placing it in between the opening and closing tag. So let's quickly head over to the button and let's accept those props that we're passing into it. We're passing the icon and we're passing the children. So what we can do right now is simply return a button and give it some additional class names, such as class name is equal to CLSX, which we know where it's coming from. And let's give it relative, padding of 0.5, G5, which stands for gradient, rounded -2XL, shadow 500, and group. And within it, we can render some kind of text. There we go. So now we can start seeing this turn into a button. But actually, we want to make this super reusable. Sometimes this button will be a real button, and sometimes it'll be an anchor tag, which means that it'll have an href instead of an onClick. So what we can do is we can accept an href property through props and then check whether it exists. So here in the return, I'll say if href exists, then instead of a button, I want to return an anchor tag. Else, we're going to return a button, okay? To this anchor tag, I'll provide the same exact class names that I added to the button, like this. And CLSX also allows us to provide any additional container class names that we pass. So later on, if you want to pass additional container class name through props, we can just add it as the second parameter to our CLSX. That's going to look something like this. But now the question is, what goes inside of the anchor tag or inside of the button? Well, what goes inside is the same, right? We want to show some text here or some text here. But what is different is that anchor tag has an href equal to href, and a button has an onClick equal to the onClick, which we can pass through props. So we can get it right here at the top. I hope this makes sense. So depending on the prop href which we passed, which can be there or maybe it's not there, we'll either render an href or a button. But then the question is, what do we show within it? Well, we can create a new component within this component called const inner. And it's going to be a basic React immediate return function that returns a React fragment. And for now, it can return a piece of text. And now we can simply render this inner component in both of these cases. So we can render inner right here, and we can render the inner right here. If I save it, you can see text. And now whatever we modify, whatever we pass, it's going to be reflected into both, no matter whether it's a button or an anchor tag. So let's make it look good. Within this empty React fragment, I will expand it, make it look like this, and I'll render a span element. This span will contain another span within it that'll contain some kind of a marker to indicate that it is currently active. Below this span, we'll check whether we have an icon. And if an icon exists, we also want to render an image. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to because we wouldn't have the source. But now that we know that we have an icon, we can say source is equal to icon, alt is equal to circle, and we can give it a class name equal to size of 10, margin right of 5 to divide it from the text, and object-contain, and z of 10. Now you can see this beautiful icon, which we're passing to this button. Finally, we can go below this icon and render one last span, which will render the children. So that'll look something like this. Great. Comparing it to the final version, the marker is this little blue thing that you can see on the left, then goes the icon, and then goes the big text. How can we get access to this marker? Well, it's basically an SVG. So let's create a new component in the components folder, and let's call it marker.jsx. And I actually provided this SVG for you in the README down below. So simply copy it and paste it here. You'll quickly notice that this just contains an SVG, and the reason why we had to expose this SVG as a React component is because it allows us to change the fill color of that SVG by passing different props to it. So we're exporting it from this file, and we can go back to the button, and now we can import it by saying marker and getting it from components. That also allows us to pass a marker fill equal to, and we can accept that through props into the button component, marker fill. So marker fill is equal to marker fill. And now we can see this little marker appear right here on the left side. Now let's add all of the additional class names to make this button into, well, an actual button. We can do that by first styling the outer span by giving it a class name of relative. Let's make it into a flex container, which will automatically make the elements appear one next to another. Let's give it items-center as well, with a min h of 60 pixels. This will make it a bit larger. Let's give it a padding x of 4 for horizontal padding, and a g4 for the gradient. You can see how nice this makes it. Let's also make it rounded 2xl to round its corners. Next, I'll give it an inner before class, as well as group-hover before opacity of 100 and an overflow of hidden. If we save that, you can see that the button changes color. Right now, the font and everything disappears, which is not what we want, but you can definitely see that something is happening. I'll explain exactly how this works very soon. But for now, let's also style the marker by giving it an absolute position and minus left minus 1 pixel. This will make it appear very nicely right here at the border. Next, we can style our children by giving this span a class name of relative, z2, font-poppins, base-bold, text-p1, and uppercase. Check this out. Now this is a real button, and no longer the text disappears because now it has a higher Z index. Great. But now, even though this button has a very cool effect, it still isn't as cool as this one. Notice this line, the border, that moves to the left side on top and moves to the right side on the bottom. This is looking so good, and it's those little details that really make your components pop. It's not a huge animation that takes time and really makes you pay attention to it, but if you combine many of these small details, they truly make a big difference to your website. So how to achieve this? Well, first, let's remove this comma typo right here from the classes of the anchor tag. And same thing goes for the button. And while we're removing stuff, we can also remove this border from the hero section as we no longer need it. And now, let me show you how we can add those micro animations. It's all made possible by using CSS before and after properties. I'm gonna add a span element, self-closing one, with a class name equal to glow-before. And if I save this and hover over the button, see how now on the top side, this line shows up and moves to the left. So how exactly does this work? Well, let me show you. You can select this and search for it across your file tree, or just head over to the index.css and find the .glowBefore class name. What's happening is that you can define something that happens before the element, in this case, before the span. And you can also define what happens after the element. There's many articles online explaining the pseudo elements before and after. But in simple words, you apply a specific class name. And then to that class name, you can add pseudo elements before and after. And the result will look something like this. You can change the content as well as the color of that specific element and place it before and after the original one. There's many other examples of where this could be used, such as for adding different elegant headings or even different ribbon things. This ribbon left is happening on before and this one is happening on after. I have created a special chapter within Tailwind CSS Starter Kit specifically talking about before and after CSS pseudo elements. The link is down in the description and you can download it completely for free. There, I will explain not only what these are and how we're using them within this project, but also how you can use them within Tailwind CSS. So after you read that and read the explanation about the glow before and glow after properties, this should make so much more sense, but let me also quickly show it to you here. So we're trying to create an element, or rather the styles for that element, that'll show before this button, or on top of it. You can think of it that way. In this case, we're trying to add a line that has a height of about 0.5 or 2 pixels. So it's a 2 pixel line that has a gradient of 8 and an opacity of 0. What happens then is when you hover over it, so group hover, when you hover over the button, we actually give it the opacity and then we move it to the left, okay? And we do that transition over a 500 millisecond delay. If you increase this over to 1000, like this, and hover, you'll see that now it stretches over a longer period of time. So basically it goes from 0 opacity and central position to 40 opacity and left 4 position, okay? And the same thing can happen with glow after, okay? So I'm gonna apply a glow after class right here, and would you look at that? Pretty cool, right? If you haven't already, check out the Tailwind CSS guide and read more about the before and after properties right there. With that said, believe it or not, we're done with this button, which means that we can exit out of it and continue creating our hero section. Right below our link scroll and the div that's wrapping it, we can create one final div. We'll use this div to absolutely position the image. So we can say absolute positioning minus top dash 32 and left dash, let's say something like maybe 2/3 for now, just to see what it is. And now within here, we can render an image. with a source equal to /images/hero.png, with a class name equal to size-1230, and on maxlg h-auto, and the alt tag will be hero, as that's the hero image. So now if we try to expand this, you can see that this image is not looking that good. After the left positioning, I'll add a W of 1230 pixels, which will already make it look better. I'll set the pointer events to none so we cannot interact with it. And now I can play with the positioning. So we have to position it on the left side, and I'll use a special math property in CSS called calc, and we'll take the 50% of the screen, and I'll cut about 340 pixels out of that to move it a bit to the side. I found this value to work the best, and this will kind of slowly make it appear from the right side. This is looking great. But now as I move this left and right, you can see it looks good on full HD, but as I lower the screen, it's kinda going outside of the screen, not looking too good, right? So what we have to do is apply proper media queries to all the different screen sizes. And for that, I'll use a class name hero-img_res for different resolutions. If I save this, you can see on mobile, we move it a bit down so we can actually read the text. And as I scroll down, you can see it kind of changes its position and it looks good on all screen sizes. To see what this hero image res does, you can search it across the CSS styles, and basically on different screen sizes such as maxlg or maxmd, we're applying different properties to properly position it. And now we have a beautiful hero section. On mobile devices, it is looking pretty simple. It doesn't even take the full view to make space for the features that are coming below it. And we can, of course, expand this part as well. On desktop devices, of course, it is looking much, much better. Now this image really shines, and we have very bold text on the left with a button that allows us to try it out. Of course, our navigation bar also shines on top. So now we can move to the second section of the day, which is the features section. Now that we have implemented this fully responsive header that looks great on all different devices. So you know the drill. I'll go ahead and create a new section in the sections folder, and I'll call it features.jsx, run refce, and we can import the features right here below the hero. And we can go into the features and start implementing them. We can get started by turning this div into a section, and we'll once again use an element coming from React scroll, to which we can pass the name equal to features. Once we complete the features section, I'll show you how we can actually use the navigation bar to scroll to different sections. Within the element, I'll create another div that'll have a class name equal to container. And within this container, we'll have another div that'll have a class name equal to relative, as well as flex. So the elements within it appear as flex children. So what kind of elements do we want to render within this div? Well, on mobile, it's going to be two primary feature sections. But on desktop, they're going to expand much further, and below them, we'll render 4 additional details features. So let's start with the top first, and then we'll move to the bottom too. Each one has an icon, a caption, a title, a subheading, and a button. So to make this work, we'll have to map over these features by creating some kind of a features array that has an object that has all of these things, like an icon, it has a caption, it has a title, and all of these things, and we would have to duplicate this 2 times for both of the features, right? So instead of doing that, it's always better to extract the logic, or in this case, the data, from JSX. And we can extract it to a special folder called constants. And within constants, we can create a new file called index.js. And within here, we can say const features is equal to an array where now we can render 2 different features. Each one can have some kind of an ID. So let's say ID is 0. It can have an icon, maybe /images/feature-1.png. It can have some kind of a caption. Let's say this is a demo caption. It can have a title. Let's say feature 1. It'll have a text. which will be a subheading equal to text1. It'll also have a button, which is an object where we can define the icon for the button. So it'll be /images/ let's do magic touch.svg, and let's do a title of watch the demo. Okay, so this is how one of the features looks like. And now we can duplicate it right below. And the second feature will have an ID of 1, an icon of features 2, and of course we can just change the number for all of these. Great. So now how do we use these features within the features component? Well, you simply add the keyword of export before it, and then you can just say features.map right here. And it just automatically imports them from /constants index.js. Whenever you call a file index, you don't even have to mention index right here. It just automatically goes to the index first. So now how do we map over this? Well, inside of a callback function, we get access to a feature, and we can automatically return something for each one of these features. That's gonna look something like this, and for each one, I simply wanna return a div. Make sure that you have a parenthesis right here and not a curly brace, because that means that this is an instant return. When you're mapping over elements, each mapped element has to have a key, which is unique. So let's use ID here. And for now, within it, let's render something like feature.title. And of course, the ID is coming from feature.id because we're mapping over these different features. Let's quickly fix the indentation right here and the closing of parentheses. And if we do that, you can see that now at the bottom, we see feature 1, feature 2. So that means that now we're taking the data about these features, which is stored in a separate file, and we can easily just refer to it within our JSX without cluttering the view. Remember what we had before? All of the data was right here within JSX. You don't want that. You want to have it in a separate file. What this also allows you to do is to send this structure over to a business owner that you're building this SaaS website for, if you're not building it for yourself. And then what they can do is they can simply modify the caption, the title, the text, and everything without messing with your code. And they can just send you this file, and you can easily just use it within your code. Or even better, you can implement a CMS, a content management system, that would allow them to change these pieces of code. So instead of declaring them statically right here, you can fetch them from a CMS and your code would still work the same. I hope this makes sense. So now let's actually style this div a bit to make it look better. I'll go back to the mobile mode and I'll first style this div that's wrapping two of these features by giving it on medium devices a flex wrap, typically a flex no wrap, border of 2, border of S3, which stands for secondary 3 color, rounded -7XL. On medium devices, overflow -hidden, so we cannot scroll through it. On max MD devices, flex -col, so we can show one below another to save space. And make sure that this only happens on max MD devices, like this. We can do a feature -after, so we're using an after thing right here to apply something after this container of features. On medium devices, we can do a gradient of 7. On max medium devices, we can do a border of none. And on max medium devices, we can do rounded -none because they'll be showing one below another. We don't have to apply rounded corners to the entire container. And on max medium devices, we can set the gap of 3 in between the elements. And now we can see them nicely one below another. So let's style the div for each one of these features by giving it a class name equal to relative z of 2. On medium devices, padding x of 10, typically padding x of 5. On medium devices, padding bottom of 10, typically padding bottom of 5. Flex of 50. On max MD devices, G of 7, which stands for gradient, and now we can slowly start seeing them appear right here. Next, on max MD, we can give it a border of 2. On max MD, we can give it a border of S3 for the color. On max MD, we can give it a rounded -3XL to round the corners. And on maxMD, we can give it a flex of 320. This will make the elements nicely appear next to it, one next to another. Finally, we can create one more div within this div, which will be an inside container to position the content, and it'll have a class name equal to w-full, flex, justify-start, and items-start. Within this div, we can have another div that'll have a class name equal to, and I won't add the styles here yet. Before, I want to show you how the actual image within it will look like. It'll have a source equal to feature.icon. And just so we don't have to end up repeating ourselves every time, feature.id, feature.icon, feature.title, we can destructure those properties right here from the feature. And we can do that by using curly braces and then getting them out. ID, icon, caption, title, text, and the button. So now instead of feature ID, we just say ID. Instead of feature.icon, we just say icon. Let's also give it a class name equal to size of 28, object-contain, and let's give it an alt tag equal to title. So this can be a dynamic property because it's different for each feature. So now let's save it, and you can see those two great looking images. Now on desktop view of the final application, you can see that it's kind of connected to the top of this frame, giving it this beautiful look. For us right now, it's not really like that. So what we can do is add one more div right here above the image, and that div will be a self-closing div that'll have a class name equal to w of 0.5, so that's 2 pixels for the width, and h of 16, so that's about 64 pixels of height, and a background bg of s3, secondary 3. And that's gonna give it this line, which will kinda connect it. So to connect it, we have to modify this class name of the container and say minus ml3, so margin left 3, margin bottom of 12, flex, items-center, justify-center, and flex-call. If I save this, you can see that now this looks better. Let's go back to the mobile mode. And now that we actually have the scroll, we can see we're missing that sticky navbar that gives us the background, because if we scroll here, this kind of disappears. We'll fix that as soon as we finish the features section. Now let's go below these two divs and let's render a p tag that'll render the caption. We can also give it a class name equal to caption, margin bottom of 5, and on max MD devices, margin bottom of 6, and on max MD devices, h of 5. There we go. So now this is a big demo caption. I actually think it's too big, so instead of applying it here, let me actually duplicate this and render the title below. And this title will be an h2. So let's render it right here, h2. And let's change the class names a bit to max-w-400, margin bottom of 7, h3, text-p4, primary 4, on max MD devices, margin bottom of 6, and on max MD devices, h5. So it's gonna change on different screen widths. And I just noticed that in this project, we're using so many Tailwind CSS media queries. Max MD this, max LG that. So for that reason, right next to the before and after pseudo properties of CSS in the Tailwind CSS guide, I'll also add a page explaining the use of max MD and max LG properties in this project. So download the guide by clicking the link down in the description, pause this video and read about it for a bit, and then let's continue. Hopefully it makes a bit more sense now. Below this h2, let's also render a p tag that'll have a class name equal to margin bottom of 11. Let's fix this class name. And it'll also have a body-1 property. On max medium devices, margin bottom of 8, and on max medium devices, body of 3. So we're changing the font size on different devices. And this one can render the text. There we go. So now we have a caption, feature title, and the text. And finally, check this out. Right below the p tag, I want to render a button. And I'll just pass this button I'll render the button dot btn title, and I'll give it an icon equal to button dot btn icon. Looks like it's not getting them. So if we go to the index of constants, oh, it's just button icon and button title. No need to add btn right here. So let me fix that. That's going to be btn icon and btn or button title. And there we go. Now this is pretty cool because we just reused our reusable button component to very quickly create different kinds of buttons. And we can also modify their icons and what they say directly in the constants part. So if we want to make the second one something like not watch the demo, but try it out, we just change it and that's it. Want to change the icons to something like docs.svg? You can do that. But of course, this is just completely fake text. And sure, we could use this fake text. You could use ChatGPT to populate it. But to make your life just a bit easier, there is only one last file under snippets right here, and it is the constants index.js file. This file will contain the exact captions, titles, and other demo content to make our application feel a bit more like a complete project. So simply copy it and paste it right here. There we go. If you take a quick look, you'll see that we have the same features which we had just before, and then later on the details and other parts that we'll be using in different use cases. So let's go back to the features and check this out. It's looking so much better now that we have real text, real buttons and captions, different icons and everything. It's looking so good. And on desktop devices, it's looking even better. Now remember, the next thing is to add these 4 detail features. So let's do that right away. That's only visible on desktop devices. So we can go below this button and below the mapping of the features. And we can create a new UL, an unordered list that'll have a class name equal to relative, flex, justify around, flex-grow, padding x of 5%, border of 2, border of S3, rounded -7XL, and on max medium devices hidden, because we only want to show it on desktop. Next, right here within it, I'll render a self-closing div with a class name equal to absolute, background of S3 over 20, top -38%, left 0, right 0, W full, age of only 1 pixel, and a Z index of 10. This will add a line, which will make a bit more sense once we add the content below it. So now let's go below this div and let's map over our details by saying details, and we can import them directly from the constants alongside the features. And we can say details.map, where we get each individual detail, and we want to automatically return it. So that's going to look something like this, detail. And we can destructure the things from the detail, such as an ID, icon, and the title. And within here, we can return a list item with a key equal to ID and a class name equal to relative, padding top of 16, padding x of 4, and padding bottom of 14. If we save this, now you can see that we have created some more space. And within each one of these list items, we can now render a div. This div will also be self-closing. So let's just close it right here and give it a class name equal to absolute, top -0, bottom -0, left -1 over 2, background of S3 over 20, W of 1 pixel only, H full, and a Z index of 10. Now we have those vertical lines appearing right here, giving us nice space to put our details within. Within this div, we can create another div, and within that div, we can render an image. Each image will render an icon with an alt tag equal to the title of that icon, and a class name equal to size-17 out of 20, object-contain, and a Z index of 20. And you can see 4 of these huge icons. Now we want to style them a bit by styling this div that's wrapping our image. We can give it a class name equal to flex, and I'll move it just a bit to the left so you can see how the 4th icon is changing. Next, I'll give it items-center. I'll also give it justify-center, which will nicely center them. Margin X of auto, margin bottom of 3, border of 2, border of -S2 for the color, rounded -full. On hover, border -S4. So we're changing the color on hover. You can see how that looks like here. But to make it just a bit nicer, we can apply a transition -all of a duration 500, and we'll also modify the shadow to 500 and a size to 20. So now, notice how nice this transition looks like. On hover, we just get a bit of a glow. Once again, it's a small touch, but these little small touches make you a very good CSS developer. Finally, going below this div that's wrapping the image, I'll render an H3 that can render the title of that specific detail, such as 24/7 customer support, but let's style it a bit by giving it a class name of relative, Z of 2, max-W of 36, MX auto, margin Y of 0, base-small, text-center, and uppercase. And we get this 4 beautiful detail sections alongside 2 big features. So this is looking amazing. And on mobile devices, it looks something like this. We only show the 2 big ones right below the hero. Beautiful. Now, as I promised, let's focus on adding the background to this navigation bar when we scroll. It doesn't look that good on mobile devices, and it's not looking any better on desktop right now. So let's go ahead and fix it. We can do that by closing the features section and then moving over back to the header. In the header, I'll create a new state. I'll call it use state, and I'll call it has scrolled and set has scrolled. So has the user scrolled or not? Initially, it'll be set to false. Next, I'll add a use effect. So you have to import this use effect from React, and it's used in a way that you give it a callback function and a dependency array. In this case, I only want to call it at the start. In there, I'll create a function called handle scroll, which is a typical React arrow function. And here, I'll set has scrolled to true if window.scrollY position is greater than 32 pixels. So if we have scrolled more than 32 pixels, we will set this has scrolled to true. For our browser to track this, we have to say window.addEventListener, and we have to add a scroll event listener and apply a handle scroll function whenever that is called. And to optimize performance, when adding these event listeners within React applications in the use effect, you also have to add a return, and then within here, you have to remove the event listener once it's no longer needed. So here we can say remove event listener. Great. So now this is updating the has scroll functionality, and now we can use that has scrolled to modify the background of this navigation bar. We can do that right here on the first style, right here on the first header element by turning it into CLSX. We can pass all of the existing things to it. That's going to look something like this. And then as the second parameter, we can check if has scrolled is true. Then we want to also apply a padding Y of 2, a BG black of 100, and a backdrop blur of 8 pixels inside of square brackets. That's going to look something like this. I just have to properly close it right here at the end. There we go. So one more time, it's looking something like this. Fixed top 0, left 0, Z50, W full, padding Y10. We can also apply a transition so this happens slowly. So transition all, duration 500, and max LG, padding Y of 4. So we're going to modify it from 4 to 2. And how that looks like in practice, Now it's gone. And if I scroll down, you can see this background nicely appear right here, and then it goes away once again. This is great, but it's even more important on desktop devices. So as I scroll here, notice how it takes less space, kind of it goes a bit up, and then you can still see and read everything right here. This is great. Let's also add a cursor pointer to this logo. We can do that by finding it right here, link scroll, and renaming this from cursor pinter to cursor pointer. There we go. I think that's gonna be much better. There we go. So now I can know that it is actually clickable. And once we click it, let's see if I modify this offset or remove it entirely, it's gonna go too much down. I actually want it to stay on top. So this leads us back to the home page. So let's maybe do a offset of 200. I go down, click it, and we're at the top. Great. Maybe even 250 was needed. Let's give that a shot. One more time. And now we're at the top. This is great. And of course, now that we have a features section, you can click try it now and it'll scroll to it. But if you click here, it's not really working. At least it's not for me. So let's scroll to the top. That is our link scroll. And yeah, we haven't provided these additional properties that link scroll allows us to add, such as to title. We want to navigate to a different section. We want to give it an offset of about -100. We want to give it a spy. I'll show you what that does. And a smooth, as well as active class is equal to nav active. I think this will be good. So now, if I click features, it scrolls to it. Oh, but still it's not selected, right? It should be selected. If I go to mobile and click features, yeah, it's still not selecting it. So let me try to do something. I'll pull this nav link right here and put it below the use effect right here. And I'll also do an on click. And as a callback function of the on click, I will set is open to false. That way on mobile devices, once you click on one of these elements, it'll actually close it and then scroll to it. That's the desired behavior. So for that reason, we had to put it right here within the header so it has access to the is open state. But check this out. Now that we put it in it, also the spy feature works, which means that if you scroll to it, as soon as you reach that section, notice how the features turned green because it knows that we're currently on that thing. So it's applying an active link to it. And of course, if you exit, it's gone. This is great. And we're officially done with the header, with a hero, and with a great features section. You know what's coming next, right? It's the pricing. This application has such a unique pricing section where we have a title and we have a button to switch between a monthly or annual pricing with this nice looking animation. And then we have 3 cards, which will make very reusable. And you can already see the buttons here, right? So now that I've collapsed my browser, I can exit out of the header, create a new section, which I'll call pricing.jsx, run RAFCE, and I can render it right here below. Pricing. I'll go into it, and we are ready to start implementing the pricing section. First things first, I'll turn this div into a section, and then right within it, I will render an element coming from React scroll and give it a name equal to pricing so we can easily scroll to it. Right within it, I'll create another div which will act as the main container. So I'll give it a class name of container. Next, within it, we'll create a div that will allow us to space our elements a bit better. This div will have many class names, starting with max-w of 960 pixels, just to give it some width. We can also give it a border, and in this case, I'll make it border 2, border red 500. There we go. So now you can see that it's starting to appear there. And for the moment, I'll let it be, and I'll create an H3 right within it. That H3 will say something like flexible pricing for teams of all sizes. There we go. And we can style it further by giving it a class name equal to h3, maxLG h4, maxMD h5. So we're kind of changing the size depending on different media queries, and a z-index of 3, so it appears on top, relative, margin x of auto, margin bottom of 14, max-w of LG, text-center, text-p4, max MD, margin bottom of 11, max SM, max W SM. So now you can see on mobile devices, it's appearing like this. And if you go to desktop, it's much larger. Great. Now let's go below this H3 and let's create a div that'll contain the buttons to switch from monthly to annual pricing. And then of course below it, we'll put all of the other pricing options. But let's take it slow, one step at a time. First, I'll try to render 2 buttons within it. These buttons are a bit different from our typical reusable buttons, so I'll start creating them from scratch by simply rendering a basic button with a monthly tag, and I'll duplicate this right below, and the bottom one will have an annual text. And you can see 2 what appear to be buttons. Now, to be able to switch between those, we have to create a new use state field. So I'll create a new use state, call it monthly, and set monthly. At the start, set to false. Then on click on each one of these buttons, so I'll say on click, we want to open up a callback function where we'll set monthly either to true or to false. If it's the first button that says monthly, we'll set it to true. If it's the second button that says annual, I'll set monthly to false. Now, they're also going to have some class names. So let's give it to the first one by giving it a class name of CLSX, and I'll give it a class of pricing-head_btn. And if monthly is true, we'll also give it a text p4 to kind of make it a bit more emphasized. Of course, we have to import CLSX from CLSX. Now, if we go down, we can duplicate this class name over to the second button. But if monthly is not true, then we're gonna apply text p4 right here. And now if you switch between the buttons, you can see the highlight color changes. But to be able to see those buttons better, let's modify the div there within by giving it a class name equal to relative, z4, margin x of auto, flex, w of 375 pixels within square brackets because it's a precise amount, rounded-3xl, border-3 pixels, border-s4 over 25, that's the color as you can see, background of s1 over 50, padding of 2, backdrop-blur of 6 pixels in square brackets, and on max MD devices, W of 310 pixels. So now we have something that looks like this. It looks like my pricing head BTN class wasn't getting applied, but now it works as I reloaded it, so it looks much better. Now let's remove this ugly red border right here from the primary div, and let's apply proper classes. Pricing-head_before. Relative. There we go, so now we can see a gradient. Margin X of auto, border of L, border of R, so now we're applying left and right borders, border color of S2, so just border-S2, background of S1 over 50, padding bottom of 40, padding top of 28. On max XL devices, max W of 4XL. On max LG devices, border-none. On max MD devices, padding bottom 32. And on max MD devices, padding top of 16. So now we made it look good across all different screen sizes. And now we can make it actually switch between those two by going below the buttons and adding a self-closing div element. Now we're going to create something that looks like this, where you can switch between it, and we'll create this rectangle that translates and animates from one side to another. We can do that by giving it a class name equal to G4 for gradient, rounded-14 before H100, pricing-head underscore BTN underscore before, this is the gradient, absolute positioning, left 2, top 2, and now the most important part, H. So we have to give the height to this element, and we'll calculate it dynamically by getting 100% of the height minus 16 pixels. That's going to look something like this. And we, of course, have to do the W, the width. So W dash calc 50% of the width, because it only needs to take half of the full container at once, minus 8 pixels. So why the 16 pixels and the 8 pixels? Because of the borders. And if we do this, you can see that now it nicely takes half the screen. Let's also apply an overflow of hidden, as well as a shadow dash 400. And here's the key part, transition dash transform, and the duration of 500. So once we perform some kind of a transition, we want to animate it in 500 milliseconds. And we can do that by turning this into CLSX. And then as the second parameter to it, we can pass it the transformation. So we can say, if not monthly, then translate X full. So fully translate this little div to the right side. Let's properly close it as well. And check this out. Now this nicely moves from left and right. It feels so good, and yet it is just native CSS. Looking good. Finally, notice in the final version how there's some kind of a background happening right here below the pricing elements. So let's add it right here as well. Below this div, I'll create another div, which will contain the background image. So let's give it a class name equal to pricing-bg, where I'll render an image with a source equal to /images/bg outlines.svg. We used those before, if you remember, with a width of 960, a height of 380, and an alt tag of outline, a class name equal to relative, and a z index of 2. There we go. So now you can see half of that. And if I duplicate that, I can also use the other one, which is bg outlines fill.png, and we'll just apply different class names, such as absolute, inset 0, opacity 5, and use a mix blend soft light, and save it. So now you can see how nicely it blends into the other image right here, and it just gives a bit more visual interest and kind of leads the eye to go below to show the pricing sections. So that means that now we can go below this image and below 2 more divs and start creating our pricing section. So I'll add a comment and open up a new div from within which we can start creating the pricing. First, I'll map over different pricing plans that we have, which are coming from our constants. So we can say plans.map, where we get each individual plan and the index of that plan. And then for each plan, we can return a div. That div has to have a key equal to plan.id and a class name. Within the div, for now, I'll render just a title of that specific plan. So that's going to be plan.title. If we scroll down, you can see core, overdrive, team, which are 3 different plans that we have at our disposal. So now let's start styling the outer div wrapping all of these plans. And then we'll move to styling each individual plan. I'll give it a class name equal to scroll-hide. And if you check what this does, you can do that if you go to index.css. Basically, this will remove the scroll bar, so we hide scrolling. We don't want to scroll through the pricing plans. Next, we can give it a class name of relative, a z of 2, minus margin top of 12, flex, items-start, On Max XL devices, a gap of 5. On Max XL devices, overflow of auto. On Max XL devices, a padding top of 6. And this is it. Now we have a container from within which we can display our pricing plans. So let's give each pricing plan a class name of pricing-plan underscore first, and pricing-plan underscore last, and pricing-plan underscore odd, as well as pricing-plan underscore even. Of course, this requires some further explanation. So let's actually search for these within our index.css right here. And basically what this is doing is it's applying the first and the last properties that we have learned about before on all the different plans. This is only applying it to the first, this is applying it to the last, this is applying it to the odd, and this is applying it to the even. We're using a lot of CSS pseudo selectors, such as first, last, odd, and even. And this will help us make all of these similar, but still apply some differences between the three depending on whether they're first, last, odd, or even. Let's also give it a class name of relative, border of 2, padding of 7, and already you can start seeing what we're creating. You can see how on the left one, it has border radius on the left, but on the right side, it's clear 90-degree angles. In the middle, it has border radius on all sides, and on the right side, it has border radius on the right side. So depending on which one we're styling, we're applying some different properties to it. And we can see that right here in the CSS. If we go here, and if I show you a border radius, or maybe it's just a border in this case, you can see that on the first, we're applying a border R0, and on the last, we're applying a border L0. And on the odd, we're applying it to all borders. So it really depends on which elements do you want to target. Next, let's also give it a max XL min-w of 80. Now it's going to be huge. On max LG, rounded-3XL. And on extra large devices, W, calc, 33.33%, so that's 100% divided by 3, plus 2 pixels, and we can close it right here. Now, soon enough, we'll be able to switch between them on mobile devices, and on desktop, we can kind of see all of them together right here. Next, let's do something else as well. Instead of rendering the title, we can check whether the index is equal to 1, and only if the index is equal to 1, we can render a self-closing div with a class name of G4 for gradient, absolute, H330, that's for the height, left 0, right 0, top 0, Z index of 1, rounded-TL, that's top left, dash 3XL, and rounded-TR, that's top right, 3XL as well. And this gives us this border which we're creating in the second in a row. That's index 1 because the first one is index 0. Below it, we can create another div. This div will have a class name equal to CLSX, and we can give it absolute, left 0, right 0, Z of 2, flex, items-center, and justify-center. But then, we can further style it if it's the index 1. So I'm going to say if index is triple equal to 1, then apply a minus top dash 6, else apply a minus top 6, and on extra large devices, minus top 11. Finally, within it, we can render an image, so it'll make more sense. So here, let's render a source of the image equal to plan.logo. There we go. So now we can see a huge plan appear right here. We can give it an alt tag equal to plan.title, as well as a class name equal to, well, it will be CLSX one more time. Typically, it'll contain object contain drop shadow of 2XL. But then if the index is triple equal to 1, meaning if it's the middle one, it'll also have a size of 120 pixels, and else it'll have a size of 88 pixels. There we go. So now you can see that the middle one is bigger, and we can see this better if we check it out in full desktop mode. So we are always styling the middle one to look a bit better because it's the main preferred plan. Now we can go below this image and below the div, and we can create another div right here. This div will have a class name equal to CLSX. We can pass in relative as the class name, flex, flex-call, and items-center. And once again, if the index is 1, meaning the middle one, we can give it an extra padding top of 24, else a padding top of 12. Okay, so now you can see how this one gets a bit more space to show off this icon and the title. Within it, we can render another div, and this div will have a class name equal to CLSX, small 2, rounded 20, relative, z of 2, margin x of auto, so it appears in the middle, margin bottom of 6, border of 2, padding x of 4 for horizontal padding, padding y of 1.5 for vertical padding, and a text of uppercase. Finally, if it's the middle one, we can apply a border of a different color. So we can say if index is triple equal to 1, then we can apply a border of P3 and the text of P3, else we can apply a border of P1 as well as a text of P1. So now if I save this, you can see how it has different border indicating the title. And just to render the title, the only thing we have to do is put it within this div right here, plan.title. There we go, core overdrive team. Once again, we're playing with different odd and events, or in this case, the indices, to ensure that the middle one gets different styling. And if this index is equal to 1 has been confusing, I think we're mentioning it many times, so it even makes sense to extract it in a variable. So we can say const is middle, or maybe we can call it is primary plan. And it'll be the primary plan if the index is triple equal to 1. So that's going to look something like this. Of course, we only have access to the index within the map, so we have to go a bit down. And then we would have to declare it here if you want to use this variable. But in this case, I'll keep the immediate return, and I know that index equal to 1 means that it is a middle or primary plan. Now, below this div containing the title, we can render another div that'll have a class name equal to relative, z2, flex, items-center, and justify-center. And within it, we can render the amount, the price of how much that plan costs. So let's render another div within it that'll render the $sign. And then here we can enter some kind of an amount. So you can see it right here. All three of them have an amount. Let's first style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to CLSX, hnum as a number, flex, and items start. And then once again, if the index is triple equal to 1, then we can give it a text dash P3, else we can give it a text of P4. So if I save this, notice how this one gets a different color. Of course, we have to make this an actual number. And you know how on the final website, you can press this and then the numbers count up or count down? Well, for that, we'll use a package called count up. It is a very simple package which we can install by running npm install react-countup, and you use it in a very simple way. You just say import count up from react count up, and now you use it as a component. So we go down to where we need to display our amount, and here we can render a self-closing count up component coming from React CountUp. We can pass different properties to it, such as start. At which price do we want to start the count up? We want to start from plan.price monthly. And where do we want to end? Well, if we choose a monthly plan, then we want to end at plan.price monthly. Else, we want to end at plan.price yearly. Next, you can choose the duration of the count up. In this case, I'll set it to 0.4 seconds. You can choose whether you want to use easing. That's kind of slowing it up and down as it reaches the end. I'll say false in this case. And you can say preserve value, which is going to keep the last value that it counts up to. And if you save this and go to the current website, you can see that as you switch it, we have this beautiful count up, which takes only 0.4 seconds. It's very quick, but it's all that you need. Great. You have to be careful with implementing things like these because your users are just gonna end up doing this and not end up buying. So you always have to be careful and maintain a good balance between adding cool animations and increasing the user experience and, the conversion rate. In this case, I think we're good. We can go one div down and then create another div, which can say per month. So /month, we can give it a class name equal to small-1, relative, top-3, and margin left 1 and uppercase. So here we're displaying that it is a per month price. Now we can go 1, 2, 3 divs down and create another div within which we can render a plan.caption. That's going to look something like this, exclusively for teams. This caption will have a class name equal to CLSX body1, relative Z of 2, margin bottom of 10, W of full, border of B bottom, S2, that's the color, padding bottom of 9, text dash center, and a text of P4. There we go. That's much better. A bit larger text. And of course, we want to change it if it's the middle one. So we can say if index is equal to 1, and it's going to have a border B, which means border bottom. Next, let's go below this div and let's open up a UL to list all of these great features. Let's give this UL a class name equal to margin X of auto, space -y -4, and on extra large devices, padding X of 7. Now within it, we can map over plan.features.map, where we get each individual feature. And for each feature, we want to automatically return a list item that's going to have a key equal to feature and a class name equal to relative, flex, items-center, and a gap of 5. So now we can map through all of these features, and each one will render an image with a source equal to /images /check.png with an alt tag equal to check and a class name equal to size of 10 and object contain. Check simply means, yes, it contains this feature. But of course, what does it contain? Let's explain it with a p tag. This p tag will have a class name of flex is equal to 1, and it's going to simply render that specific feature. There we go. So now we know that this one has all starter features plus 1 terabyte of additional storage, unlimited projects, and analytics. Finally, we need some kind of a call to action button. So let's go below the UL and create a div that'll have a class name equal to margin top of 10, flex, W-full, and justify-center. And within it, we can render a button. Remember, this is our own button component, so make sure to import it from the top. Say get started, and pass it the icon prop equal to plan.icon. If I save this, notice how each one gets a different icon because it comes from the plan. Finally, we want to make our middle offer stand out even more. So let's give it one last differentiator by checking if index is equal to 1. And if it is, we can return a p tag that'll say limited time offer. But it won't just stay right here below the button. We're going to make it look a bit better. So let me actually collapse this so you can see it. And let's give it a class name to this p tag. It'll have a class name of small-compact, a margin top of 9. Let's put it within the class name. Margin top of 9. A text dash center, text dash P3 to change the color. There we go. Already looks better. Before content dash, and you want to add a dash like this. That's before content. And you can also add after margin X of 2.5 and after content dash like so. So now we have different dashes. And let's also add a margin X of 2.5 to the before. So we can say before margin X of 2.5. And now we have this limited time offer. This is great. And now that this is looking so good on desktop devices, the question is, how will it look on tablet or mobile? So let me slowly collapse this thing right here. So you can see on tablet, they all just become a little smaller, but they still fit. But we definitely have to fix this part where the name of the plan goes into the icon. But as we go all the way to mobile, that's going to look something like this. You cannot really scroll through these plans. So this is not good. There's no horizontal scroll, and you cannot really read anything besides the main plan. You definitely don't want this to happen, as you would lose a lot of revenue from mobile users. So let's fix it. Right here at the start of the pricing section, where we have a div that's wrapping all the plans, currently I misspelled auto right here. It should be overflow auto. So let's spell it properly. And you can see that now the second pricing plan is still visible, and users on mobile devices will be able to nicely use their thumb or index finger to move between different plans. This is great. Now, let's quickly fix this plan caption, or I think that's going to be the plan title. That is right here. We have small 2, rounded 20, relative Z2, margin X auto. All of this is looking good. This right here is supposed to say uppercase. There we go. That's now fixed. It's uppercased. But that still didn't fix the positioning. We have to see where the icon is located. And the icon is right here. It looks like I'm missing a dash right here on -top -6. If I fix that, now it nicely flows to the top of this container, and we have space for the title, both in this case and with this larger icon. Great. The mobile pricing plan is looking amazing. Only one plan visible at the moment, but since we left some space on the right side, a user will know that they can swipe to see more. Beautiful. And I don't even have to mention how great this is looking on desktop devices. And of course, we forgot about the monthly and the annual switch. If I were to further improve this, I would want to make sure that the monthly and annual switcher can fit within the same height of the screen while we see the price. So if I zoom it out a bit, something like this where I can see both at the same time would be perfect. That's a change that you can make. Maybe by integrating this switcher right here within each one of these plans. That's something that I often see on these kinds of pricing plans. But with that said, the pricing is done. You can see it's also indicated by this navigation bar link. We officially have the hero section, the header, the features, and the pricing. Now we can move to the next section of the day, which is curiosity didn't kill the cat. It got answers. And that is the FAQs, frequently asked questions. This section has a very interesting segment, as you can see here, where 4 different lines point to this icon. And then we're just reusing a single component that has a question and the answer. So let's do that next. By closing the pricing, creating a new section right here, I'll call it FAQ.jsx, run RAFCE, and then import it right here below the pricing. FAQ, we can go into it and start implementing it. First things first, let's turn this div into a section, and then right within that section, we can render an element so that we can scroll to it. Let's give it a name equal to FAQ and a class name equal to relative. Right within it, we can create another div that'll act as a wrapper, and within it, we can have an H3 element. This H3 will say something funny like, curiosity didn't kill the cat. It gave it answers. And below it, we can also render a p tag that'll say, you've got questions, we've got answers. It's a bit playful, but still, it gets the point across. Let's style this h3 by giving it a class name equal to h3. But this seems a bit too big for mobile devices. So max MD devices, we're going to actually change it to h5. Let's give it a max W of 640. And on max LG devices, it'll actually be a max W of MD, so it fits the screen. We can also give it a margin bottom of 7 and text dash P4. There we go. So now it nicely fits right here. We can also style the p tag by giving it a class name equal to body1, and on max LG devices, max W SM. And now everything fits nicely. Let's also wrap this div with another div which will act as a container. So we can give it a class name equal to container, relative z of 2, and padding y of 28 to divide it a bit from top and bottom. And now we can place this div into that div above. If you do that, notice how it gives it some space and it nicely formats it. Now let's go below this div that's wrapping our p and h3 tag, and let's create a divider line. So this will be a small vertical line, which will just be an interesting element to look at. We can give it a class name equal to FAQ-line underscore after. Let's give it a W of 0.5 and an H of full. Let's position it absolutely and give it a left 50%, so it shows in the middle. We can also give it a top 0, minus Z-1, so it shows below other elements, and a background of S2. And you can see this line right here, but it's in the middle. Instead of positioning it left 50%, instead we can do left calc 50% minus 1 pixel. And now it'll get positioned in the center. Now we can go below that div and below one more div to create a div which will act as the wrapper for our questions and answers. We can give it a class name equal to FAQ glow underscore before, relative z of 2, border of 2, border of S2, that's for the color, and BG of S1 for the background color. There we go. So now we can see nice looking gradient. And right within it, we can create a new div that'll have a class name equal to container, flex, a gap of 10, and then max LG devices block. Within it, we can render this exciting part. So you see this line and the gradient, it all leads to this icon within a circle, which will act as the separator to then show our questions. So let's implement it as the first thing within this div by creating another div within it with a class name equal to rounded-half, absolute, minus top-10, left-calc, 50%, minus 40 pixels, which is its width. Give it a Z4, flex, size of 20, items-center, justify-center, border of 2, border of S2, and a background of S1. And now we can see this circle right here. And I'm missing the pixels right here. So let's do 50% minus 40 pixels. And now we can render an icon within it. We can do that by rendering an image tag with a source equal to /FAQ-logo.svg. Let's also give it an alt tag equal to logo and a class name equal to size-1/2. And that's gonna look something like this. It's going a bit too below now, so we cannot see it because we're actually putting it below the top. But as soon as we start adding the questions, we'll be able to fully see it. So let's go below the div that's wrapping the image and let's create another div. This one will have a class name equal to relative, flex-1, and padding top of 24 to divide it a bit from that icon. Within here, we can map over our FAQs by saying FAQ, and we can import it from constants index.js or JSX, and we can then slice it only to take the first half of the answers, which we want to show on the left side. So let's figure out how we can calculate only half of the items. We can do that by saying const half length is equal to math.floor, in case we have an uneven number, to which we pass the FAQ.length divided by 2. Now we can take this half length and slice it from 0 to half length. That's the first half of the elements. We can then map over them, and for each FAQ, we get an item, that's a question and answer, and an index of that item. Next, we can show something for each one of these. So let's for now just render a div and close it. And within it, we can render an FAQ dot, and let's see, what do we have there? We have a question and an answer. That's it. So let's say FAQ dot question and save it. And maybe it's better to call this item an FAQ. So right here, when we're mapping over it, let's actually call it FAQ. It makes a bit more sense. And if we do that, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different questions. How easy is it to set up Sora? Can I integrate it with other platforms? How do you add new content? And so on. Great. But for each one of these, we want to show something much more interesting. We want to show a question, this nice looking button, and then we want to expand it to see the full answer. And it makes more sense to turn this into a new reusable component to implement it. So let's do just that. In the components folder, I'll create a new file called FAQ item.jsx. I'll run rafce and I'll import it right here. Instead of using the div, I'll just render an FAQ item as a self-closing component. To it, we can pass a key, since we're mapping over it, equal to FAQ.id. We can also pass an FAQ itself. So we can say FAQ is equal to FAQ. Or since we are calling it an FAQ item, it might make more sense to call it item, because FAQ stands for frequently asked questions, meaning multiple, but in this case, we're rendering one. So make sure to just call everything item here. And we can also pass it an index so that we know which one we want to open up and read more about. Great. So now we can enter this FAQ item and start implementing it. First things first, we can accept all of these props right here, such as the item and the index. And we can return a div with a class name equal to relative, z of 2, and margin bottom of 16. Next, we can render another div right within it, and this will be a primary group div that'll wrap our entire question and the button to open it. So let's give it a class name equal to group, relative, flex, cursor dash pointer to indicate that it is clickable, items dash center, justify dash between, and a gap of 10, and a padding x of 7 in between the elements. To this one, later on, we'll want to add an on-click functionality. For now, I'll just leave that as an empty callback function. Within it, I'll have another div with a class name equal to flex-1, so it expands nicely. And then within that div, we can render the index of the question. So let's render something like, let's do, if index is lower than 10, then render 0 in front of it, else render nothing in front of it, and then render the actual index. So that's going to look something like this. If I save this, you can see 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. Great. Let's style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to small dash compact, margin bottom of 1.5, text dash p3, and on max LG devices, we'll hide those numbers completely. So as you can see, we cannot fit them here. Next, let's show the actual question. We'll do that right below this div. This one will render the item.question. There we go. This is nice. Let's style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to Well, let's make it CLSX because we'll have to have an active state for each one of these questions, especially for the one that is currently selected. So let's get this CLSX imported from CLSX. And to it, we can pass a class name of h6. Let's also give it a text-p4. We can give it a transition-colors, duration of 500. On max medium devices, flex. On max medium devices, min-h-20. On max medium devices, items-center. Okay, this is looking good. And now let's also apply the active state, okay? So for that, we'll have to create a new use state field. I'll call it active ID, set active ID at the start equal to null because none will be selected. And then based on the active ID, we can get access to the active element. So we can say const active, and it'll be true if the active ID is triple equal to the item.id. Now, based on that property, we can now render the active class on this CLSX by saying if active is true, then we can render maxLG text-p1, which will give it a different primary color. Of course, this has to go within the parentheses of CLSX. So let's fix it. And it's good. Now, how can we actually make these selectable? Well, for that, we'll have to modify the active ID on click. And we'll do it on click of the entire group. So here, we can open up the function and say set active ID to be equal to, if active ID is triple equal to the item.id, then set it to null, else set it to the item ID that we clicked. Why are we doing this? And why not just set the active ID to item ID? Because we want to be able to toggle it on or off, okay? So if we're clicking on the one that is already selected or already active, then we want to toggle it off or toggle it down so we can expand some other one. And now you can see if I select it, we can see different ones that are currently selected. This is great. And we can have multiple selected at the same time because they're going to all be expanded together. Now let's go down a bit. We'll go below this div and below one more div and render another div that'll have a class name equal to CLSX. And I'll give it a class name of FAQ icon. And within that div, we can render another self-closing div with a class name equal to G4 for gradient, size 11 out of 12, rounded dash full, and a shadow of 300. Now we have this plus icon right here. We can further style this FAQ icon by giving it relative, flex, size of 12, which will make it a bit larger, items-center to center it, justify center to center it horizontally, rounded-full, border-2, border-S2, shadow of 400, transition-all, duration of 500, and on group-hover, border of S4. So now on hover, we get this beautiful glow effect, inviting us to open it up. Great. Finally, let's also give it an active class. So if we are currently active, so if active is true, then we can give it a before bg of p1. Let me click it so you can see how that looks like. There we go. Let's also give it after rotate 0. You see now it rotated into a minus. And after, we can give it a bg of p1. So now it has a bit of a different color. It has the selected color, same as the text. So now we can actually click and unclick different things, and it looks great. Next, we'll use a super handy component called slide down, which we can install as a package. So let's go to our terminal and let's run npm install react-slide down. And you'll notice that this one cannot be installed alongside our other dependencies due to a dependency mismatch. This sometimes happens, so what you can do is rerun the command, but then add --legacy -peer -deps to the command, which will make sure to fix the mismatch in different versions and make it work alongside our other dependencies. Once you do that, you can go below this self-closing div and below 2 more divs. And then you can render this slide down component, which you need to import from React slide down. And make sure that this import is correct. So it's actually coming just from React slide down as a named import. So it has to be within curly braces. And you also have to import the CSS to make it work. So we need to add import react-slide down /lib /slide down.css. Great. So now if we go down, within it, we can pass a different answer. But first, we're only going to show it if the active ID is triple equal to the item ID. That means that we have previously selected that and expanded it. If that is the case, we want to render a div element. And this div will simply render the text of the item.answer. If we save this, you should be able to see that now if you expand it, you can see the text. Let's style it a bit better by styling this div within the slide down. I'll give it a class name of body-3. Let's also give it a padding X of 7 and a padding Y of 3.5. There we go. This is much better. And would you look at this? This slide down component has a very nice animation for sliding up and down different things. And yeah, our button and on hover effects are just making it even better. Let's quickly check how it looks like on desktop. And yeah, this surely isn't like the finished product, right? I mean, many people will be happy with this alone, but we're aiming for something much better. We're aiming for this layout, which is much more visually engaging. And on desktop, we'll also give it this nice looking background. So to implement it, we can go below this slide down and create one div. This div will wrap 2 additional divs in it. The first div will have a class name of G4, and that stands for gradient 4. It'll have an absolute positioning with an inset of 0.5, -z-1, and rounded -3xl. There we go. So now we can see a great looking card. Next, I'm going to add another div, which is also going to be self-closing with a class name equal to absolute, left-8, top-0, h for height, 0.5, w of 40 for width, and a background of P1. And now we can see this line will also point to us which ones are currently opened. So we want to make sure that not all of them look like this right off the bat. Instead, we want to give this div a class name and make it CLSX. We want to give it a G5, which is a gradient, -bottom-7, -top-7. So this is nicely positioning it. Left 0, right 0, -z-1, rounded -3xl, opacity of 0, transition -opacity, and duration of 500. So now take a look. There's no any kind of background, but now we can select and say if this element is active. So if active is true, then we can bring the opacity back to 100%. So now we get this beautiful UI where you'll be able to open these elements up. Right now, it doesn't seem to be clickable to me, so we definitely have to fix that. And we can do that by giving it a property of absolute, because we're using a lot of positionings and we want to make sure that it is absolutely positioned within the container. There we go. So now this is looking perfect. At least it is on mobile devices. Looks similar to the finished version. But on desktop, it's almost there, but not quite yet. Let's exit out of the FAQ item. We're done with it, and we can add the second column of our FAQ items. We can do that by going below this div that has the first wrap, and we can duplicate it right below it. it's going to look something like this. We only need padding top on large devices on the bottom one, and we'll slice it from half length until the end. So you only need to pass the half length. And then all of the other elements are going to be the same, besides the index, which we're clicking on, which has to start with half length plus index. Okay, so if we click in the element on the second column, we want to add the initial elements that are before it, and only then select that index. Now, check this out. This looks great on desktop devices, but we can also add a line in between and a gradient to make one side or the other pop a bit to differentiate them. To do that, we can go 2 divs down and create a self-closing div with a class name equal to FAQ-line underscore after absolute left dash calc 50% minus 1 pixel top 0 minus z minus 1 h dash full w05. This is almost the same as the above line that we had, this one here. So we're just kind of continuing it below the icon. Let's give it a background of S2, and on max LG devices, it'll be hidden. So we only want to show it on desktop. Great. This is looking amazing. With that in mind, you are done with this amazing FAQ section, which you can reuse on any kind of other website. And you can see on the navbar, it says FAQ and it nicely scrolls to it. Same thing on mobile, it is looking great. And as you saw by the navigation, we have completed 4 out of 5 major sections: home, features, pricing, and FAQs. Now we have a beautiful demo and download section, which is needed for any kind of a mobile app website. And also it's not listed here, but we're going to add another section, which is testimonials. So let's do that right away by going to our app.jsx and create a new section called testimonials.jsx, run RAFCE, import it right here as testimonials, and let's get started implementing it. The testimonials section will be quite similar to the FAQs. We're going to wrap it in a section, and it'll have a class name equal to relative, a z index of 2, padding y of 24 to divide it a bit from top and bottom, on medium devices, padding y of 28, and on large devices, a larger padding y of 40. Within that section, we can have a div, which will act as a container. So let's give it a container class name with a block display, and on large devices, it'll be flex. Right within it, we can render another div, which will wrap our h3. So let's give it a class name equal to testimonials underscore head dash res relative z of 2, margin right of 20, and a flex of 300. And right here, we can render first a p tag that's going to say wall of love. And right below it, we can render another h3 that'll say something like words from our fans. It's going to look something like this. So let's style it further by giving this p tag a class name equal to caption, margin bottom of 5, on max MD devices, margin bottom of 2.5. And we can style the h3 by giving it a class name, you can guess it, of h3, on max medium devices, h5 to make it a bit smaller, and a text of p4 to make it pop a bit. Right below it, we can start creating the container for our testimonials. So let's create a div that'll have a class name equal to testimonials underscore inner dash after, as well as testimonials underscore inner dash before. We really want to make sure that our testimonial section looks interesting. On the left side, there's going to be some empty space, and on the right side, we'll be able to look at all of those testimonials. So let's give it relative, a minus margin y of 12, minus margin right of 3, flex, so they all appear one next to another, items-start, on max LG devices, static, and on max MD devices, block. And within it, we can render another div that'll have a class name equal to testimonials underscore group dash after and a flex of 50. On mobile devices, you cannot see a lot happening, but if you move to desktop devices, you can see those before and after lines that we have added that now have created a nice space for us to render the testimonials within. So if we go back to mobile view, I can render this class name properly, and within it, we can map over our testimonials by importing them from constants. It's coming from constants index.jsx, and we also need to get the half right here. And here, we'll also render them in 2 tries, half by half. So let's say const half length is equal to math.floor testimonials.length divided by 2. Now we can simply slice them by saying testimonials.slice, and we'll go from 0 to half length. And then we can run a dot map where we get each individual testimonial. And for each testimonial, we can return a self-closing testimonial item like this. Of course, this is a component which we have to create. So let's head over to the components folder and create a new testimonial item.jsx, run rafce, and nicely import it right here within testimonials. It's coming from components testimonial item. To it, we have to pass a couple of props, such as a key equal to testimonial.id, an item, which is equal to each individual testimonial, and you can also pass some additional container class names, which is going to be last after hidden and last after maxMD block. This will allow us to kind of just shift them up a bit. You can see how here we have this shift, then we have another shift, and then another shift. I'm not sure if you can notice it. It's very small, but it'll actually play a difference in a way that it makes your eye nicely fall down and follow each one of these, as they're just a bit staggered between each other. They're not in line. And we'll achieve that by rendering 2 different sets or 2 different columns of testimonials. So this is our first set. And then we can go below one more div, and we can create another div with a class name equal to flex50. So it's taking 50% of the screen, same as this left side. And in there, we can basically duplicate this entire testimonials.slice, paste it in there, slice it from half length to the end, and we'll just modify the classes a bit. We'll have last after hidden. Then the next one will be after right-auto, after left-0, after max-md, minus left-4, and on medium devices padding x of 12. And here we're rendering 3 additional testimonial items. So right now that's looking something like this. So now we have to go into the testimonial item and implement that reusable component, which will allow us to further style all of these testimonial items. So let's do that first by first accepting those props, such as item and container class name. And here we can render a div with a class name equal to CLSX, and we can pass many class names, such as relative, which will allow us to absolutely position the children. We can also give it a padding x of 14, which will give it some padding on the left and right side. You can see how it's behaving right here in the browser. We can give it a padding top of 11 and padding bottom of 14 as well. There we go. Now they're nicely spaced. Next, we can give it after absolute, after bottom-0, after right-0, and then this is the key part, after h-0.5, and after w-screen. Now, as soon as we give it after bg of s2, you can start seeing those lines before and after. We're forming a grid using before and after properties. We can also give it after content and then simply display an empty string right here. Next, we can give it a max MD devices, padding X of 0, max MD, padding top of 11, and after max MD, minus right dash 4. Finally, we can pass it all the additional container class names that we're passing to it. Of course, all of this will make much more sense once we actually render the testimonial. So let's render an HTML5 block quote element within which we can render item.comment. There we go, that's much better. Let's give it a class name equal to h6, margin bottom of 8, and text-p4. There we go, that's much larger. And you can see that because of the difference in text, these elements are now nicely staggered like this. Right below this block quote, we can also create another div and give it a class name equal to flex, items-center, on max XL devices, minus margin right of 8. Within that div, we can render another div that'll render an image. That image will be the avatar image. So let's give it a source of item.avatar URL. An alt tag is the item.name of that person. And a class name will be equal to size-full object cover. And now you can see those different people appear right here. Let's style the div that's containing this image to make them a bit smaller by giving it a class name of margin right of 4, size of 20, shrink of 0, rounded dash half, border dash 2, border dash S2, and padding of 1.5. And finally, below that div, we can render another div which will wrap our text. We can render an H4 right here that'll render the item.name, which is the person's name, and below it, we can render a p tag, which will render the person's role. So that's going to be Jim Bradley, vid capital, Becky from Flow Clips, and so on. Let's style them a bit by giving this H4 a class name of body2, margin bottom of 0.5, and text-p1. And let's also style the p tag by giving it a class name equal to small-compact, uppercase, and text-s3. So now this appears more like a caption. This is looking amazing. I mean, it's such an interesting section, and I know that using this before and after is a bit confusing. If you haven't yet downloaded the Tailwind CSS guide containing an explanation of before and after, do that right now. But even after that, it might still be a bit confusing. It definitely takes some time getting used to. But with that in mind, now we have a great looking FAQ section and a great looking testimonial section. If you want to take this a step further, I would actually make this left side, words from fans, sticky, which means that as you scroll down, it would stick to the left side of the screen, which would allow you to add many more testimonials without it seeming overbearing, because you can always read on the left side what this is about, words from our fans. Great. With that in mind, we can now exit out of the testimonial section and we can check out mobile view, wall of love. This is looking great. Let's expand our code and let's create the next exciting section, which is the download section. First, I'll create a new section in the sections folder called download.jsx, run RAFCE, and then I'll head over to the app and import it right here. Download coming from sections download. I'll get right into it. And just to show you what we're building, it is this, a very clean left side that repeats the logo of our application and giving us many different call to actions to test it out on different devices. And of course, a great looking image that shows us the demo of the application. And if you want to, you can also put some kind of a video play here, or maybe even a GIF so that the user can see more different screens of the application. This is one of the more exciting sections of this course, so let's implement it together. By now, you should be a pro of starting these new sections, so you already know how it works. Let's turn this into a section, and then we can also create an element right within it so that we can scroll to it. We can give it a name equal to download, and we can give it a class name equal to G7 for the gradient. To show that gradient, we'll also have to make it relative and give it some size, such as padding bottom of 32 and padding top of 24. And now you can see this gradient appear right here. We can modify that on max LG devices to lower the padding bottom to 24, and on max MD devices, we can lower it to padding Y of 16. Right within that element, we can create another div with a class name equal to container. Straight within this container, we can have another div which we'll use for positioning our inner children elements, such as a div with a class name equal to flex and items-center. Within it, we can have a div that'll have a class name equal to relative margin right of 6, flex of 540, on max XL devices, flex of 280, on max LG devices, flex of 256, and on max MD devices, a flex of 100. This will ensure that it looks good on all different kinds of devices. So now let's create a div with a class name equal to margin bottom of 10 that'll wrap our image. Right here, we can just display our Zora logo. So we can say source is equal to /images/Xora.svg. Let's give it a width of about 160 and a height of about 55. We can give it an alt tag of Xora as well. Right below it, let's render a p tag that's going to be below this div that contains the image. And this p tag will say, try it now for free on iOS, Android, PC, web, whatever your flavor, we've got you covered. There we go. Let's style that further by giving it a class name equal to body-1 on margin bottom 10 and max W of MD. There we go. That's more like it. And below that, we can actually map over all of the icons that would allow people to download it. So below the p tag, let's create a UL, which stands for an unordered list. Give it a class name of flex, flex-wrap, items-center, and a gap of 6. And here we can map over all of our links coming from constants. Links.map, where we can destructure the properties of a link, such as an ID, URL, and an icon. And for each one of these links, we want to show an LI, a list item, with a key equal to ID and a class name equal to download_tech-link. If I render the URL right here, you can see that we have 4 different empty URLs. So let's continue styling this LI by giving it a download_tech-link_last-before. I know, a specific class name. And after that, download_tech-link_last-after. Finally, instead of rendering a URL, we'll render an anchor tag that'll have an href equal to URL. So it's pointing to that link, and it'll render a span that'll have a class name equal to absolute minus top-2 and rotate 90 degrees like this. And within it, we can render the same marker component which we used on our button before. You see those? But now, of course, we have to add it to our image. So below the span, let's actually render an image with a source equal to /images, of course within a string, /lines.svg with an alt tag of lines, and a class name equal to absolute size-13/20 and object-contain. We are rendering this background that'll appear behind the actual logo. Below that, we can render a span. That span will have a class name equal to download_tech-icon. And finally here, we can render the actual icon. That's going to look something like this. So let's actually put these backgrounds behind these tech icons by styling our anchor tag. I'll give it a class name equal to size-22, download underscore tech dash icon underscore before. That's going to create a circle. Relative. That's going to position it somewhere near the elements. We can give it a flex property. Items dash center to center it vertically. And justify dash center to center it horizontally. Rounded dash half. Border dash 2. Border dash S3 for the color. Background of S1. Transition dash border color of a duration of 500 milliseconds. And that's going to look something like this. If you hover over them, you can see how nicely that looks. And currently, you can see that we are applying a flex wrap. So they're wrapping. We have 3 here, and then 1 goes below. If you expand it a bit, you can see automatically that all 4 fit right here nicely within the screen. So on mobile, it is looking great. But what's the case with desktop? Well, as you can see right here, we have a logo, the text, and the icons. But hey, where's the actual demo? That's the section we're building, right? Well, let me show you. We'll go below this UL right here and below one more div. Then we'll create another div with a class name equal to margin bottom of 10. And on MaxMD devices, we'll actually hide it. We only want to show this on larger devices. Next, we'll have another div that'll have a class name equal to download underscore preview dash before. This is going to add this nice line right here at the top, before the element. Same things goes for the after. Download underscore preview dash after. I'll also give it a rounded dash 40 relative W dash 955 pixels, border of 2, border of S5 for the color, and a padding of 6. And now we see those lines within which we'll have the image. Let's create another div. This one will have a class name of relative, rounded dash 3XL, background of S1, padding X of 6, padding bottom of 6, and padding top of 14. We're starting to create the shape within which we'll display our image. Next, within that div, we can render some dots. I'll do that by using a self-closing span with a class name equal to download underscore preview dash dot, and I'll apply a left of 6 and a background of P2. If I save this, you can see this dot appear right here. I'll duplicate this 2 more times, and I'll modify the dots a bit. This time, I'll say left 11 and a background of S3. And for the last time, I'll say left 16. So I'm going to move it a bit more to the left and give it a background of P1 divided by 15, like this. And now we can see we have created something that looks like macOS window. We have a nice looking border, and then we have those buttons to close, expand, or minimize it. Finally, right below the last span, we can render a self-closing image with a source equal to /images /screen.jpg. If I save this, see how nicely this fits into the picture. It feels like it is a real device. Let's modify it a bit by giving it a width of about 855, a height of about 655, an alt of screen, and a class name equal to rounded-XL. This will remove some white spacing right here in the corners. And we have a beautiful demo section that allows you to actually click the links and potentially navigate your users to the download section for each operating system. Now, right below that, let's show some of the logos of companies that use our software. It's always great to build that trust with your users by showing them that many other people that they know are also using the software. So let's go 4 divs down, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's create a UL to map over those logos. Right here, we can render logos.map. And for each one of these logos, we can get an ID, a URL, a width, a height, and a title. And for each one, we can automatically return an LI that'll then render an image. Image will have a source equal to URL, and we'll pass it different width and height, because in most cases, different companies have logos of different widths and heights, and an alt tag will be title. If I save this, it looks like I have a syntax error. So let's see what is wrong right here. It looks like I haven't imported logos from constants, so make sure to import it. And if you go down, you can see 5 different logos right here, all great companies. So let's actually show them horizontally instead of vertically by applying a class name to this UL equal to margin top of 24, flex, justify dash center, and then max LG devices, this will be hidden. So we only want to show it on desktop. To this li, we can give a key equal to ID since we're mapping over different elements, and a class name equal to margin x of 10 to create some space in between. And this nicely wraps up our download section so we can see which companies have downloaded and use our software. This is great. And taking a quick look at the navbar, you can notice that we have reached the last section of this amazing build. So the only thing we're gonna do to quickly wrap this up is create a very minimalistic footer. We can do that by going back to the app, and you know the drill, I don't even have to say it. We'll create a section called footer.jsx, run rafce, and then import that footer right here at the bottom of our app. Once we're there, you should be able to see it right here at the bottom, which means that we can start implementing it. This time, instead of section, we'll use an HTML5 semantic footer tag. Within it, we'll have a div with a class name equal to container and a padding y of 10 to create some space. Within that div, we'll have another div that'll have a class name equal to flex, w full, so we take the full width of the container. On max empty devices, we'll actually make it flex call, so the elements appear one below another. Below that, we'll render another div that'll have a class name equal to small dash compact, flex, flex dash 1, flex wrap, items dash center, justify dash center, and a gap of 5. Within it, we can render a p tag. I'll give it a class name equal to opacity 70. This doesn't have to be so pronounced. And here you can put your copyright. So you can say something like copyright. In this case, I'll say JS Mastery. Of course, you can put your first and last name. Below that, we can render a div, which will wrap 2 different links. So let's give it a class name of flex, items dash center, justify dash center, and then small devices margin left of auto. Within it, we can render a p tag that'll say privacy policy. And below it, we can render another one that'll say terms of use of our specific application. Of course, let's style it a bit better by giving it a class name equal to legal dash after and relative, margin right of 9, text dash p5, transition dash all, duration of 500, and on hover, text dash p1. So now if you hover over this, we get this nice looking effect. We can do something similar for the terms of use. So let's just copy the second part of this, text p5, transition duration, and hover effect, and add it as a class name right here. And don't forget to close it. Now we have 2 different links. Finally, below that, let's render the links to our social media platforms. Nowadays, it's always great to capture users that visit your landing page. Maybe they're gonna forget the URL, but if they follow you on social media platforms, then you can get them to visit again and again, especially if you create engaging content. So let's go 2 divs down and let's create a UL. And this UL will have a class name equal to flex, flex dash 1, justify dash center, gap of 3, on max MD devices, margin top of 10 to divide it a bit from the top, and on medium devices, justify dash end. Finally, within here, we can import socials from the constants file and then say dot map. We can map over ID, URL, icon, and title. And for each one, we can render a list item. Now, make sure that this socials ends with an index.jsx. Before, I might have used JS, but I decided to provide you with 4 different SVGs right here for different devices, such as Android, Windows, web, and then we use them within those links. So whenever we use some JSX, like a functional component, then you need to end your files with .jsx extension. So now that we're mapping over the links, let's give each one of these LIs a key equal to ID. And let's render an anchor tag that'll have an href equal to URL, a class name equal to social-icon, and within it, we can render an image with a source of icon, an alt of title, and a class name equal to size of 1/3 and object-contain. If I save this, you can see 4 different icons appear right here at the bottom. This is a very minimalistic yet quite effective footer. You don't want to take a lot of attention from the user by doing something crazy in the footer. They reach the end and they should perform the action you want them to perform. In this case, download this app. And it's looking good on desktop, but this could have been centered. So maybe if I go here and if I take this div that's wrapping the p tags, and if I take it outside one more div, then this will look a bit more centered. I actually prefer this look, but if you want to, you can bring this back in, or you can center it however you prefer. This is your app after all, and I invite you to make it even more your own. I have recently posted this 3D portfolio, but it's not just a portfolio. At the start, there is a complete beginner 3JS course, and Xora is such a beautiful app, and implementing some 3D elements within it would be absolutely amazing. In the same way, not that long ago, I've created a GSAP course. You can search for it. It's right here under this 3D iPhone website. You can watch the GSAP course and then add some engaging GSAP animations to make different elements scroll and appear on the screen. There's endless potential to further improve this, and I can't wait to see what you'll come up with. Once you add additional changes, make sure to post it and tag me on socials such as Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or anywhere else. But to be able to tag me, and for me and anyone else to be able to see your website, you first have to deploy it. So let's do that next. To deploy our great application, we'll be using Hostinger's fast servers. So just head over to the Hostinger's dashboard and go to the project that you assigned the domain to. Then go to the file manager. Go into the public HTML and delete the default PHP file. We'll put our own website here. Back within your editor, open up the terminal and stop it from running. Then run npm run build to generate an optimized production build of our application. It finished in less than a second. You can find your application in the dist folder, so right-click it and then click Open in Finder or File Explorer if you're in Windows. Go into the dist folder and then simply drag and drop all the files within it. This should take just a couple of seconds. And if it's gone, you can go back to your project and click on your domain name. Check this out. We have deployed and hosted our website literally in a matter of seconds. It cannot be easier than this. It is looking great. It is super performant. We have a great looking title and favicon, and it is HTTPS secured. Not to mention how fast it is. So this brings us to the end of this amazing build. But your learning doesn't have to stop there. I would highly recommend checking out the Beginner 3JS course and a 3D portfolio, as well as the GSAP course that I mentioned before that you can use to further optimize the application we've built. And if that's not enough for you, check out jsmastery.pro. There's many new courses coming up, so by the time you're watching this, it's possible that you're seeing something completely different. With that in mind, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.